In China, we're in Alibaba Cloud. In the US, we're on AWS Cloud to keep, the user data completely separate. And also we don't keep any sensitive privacy data. They're mostly just retail-related behavioral retail data, which is considered not sensitive in any countries. Yeah.
Great. So as you know, so that we got two parallel development with tech platform, and then we do have someone like Joy overstep and video the same way. We overstep in both countries in our innovation investments. So we always aware that at the end, in China, you always stay away from certain sensitive areas because it's so centralized to the administration of the country, and the US is the same way, right? And so we tend to look at the consumer sectors as a start, and then migrate over to some of the overlapping areas as much as possible. But the question really becomes, as we go forward, how do we handle the situation as outsiders, right, as participants? But let me start, and I will go around the panel members and get their input as well. And I would like to focus on the government side because I spent a couple of years at Kennedy School, so I got involved in policy level discussions among the players in both countries. But at the end, I think government has a role to play in all this. At the end, I think government is more establishing policies and standards and incentives. There's really the major role of the government, right? You get policy settings and get incentive structure, like rules and regulations, allow the participant like us to play by the rules. But if the government step in and try to pick champions, and they tend to be a little bit difficult. And it's not just happening in China, it's happening in the US as well. You cannot really get in and pick winners and successful companies because the people who are involved in that decision tend to be non-technologists, non-entrepreneurial, and so they tend to have a different kind of senses on what make it work. So I encourage government to really stay with the area of focus, and there's a lot to do right there as is, and let the market in all countries determine its outcomes. And so I'll just take a roll call according to the direction of the screen. William, go next.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that would be great. I think that is going to be difficult to achieve. I mean, for many years, in the early days, multinationals in China had a lot of benefits, but the government put the finger on the scale to try and help the local players. At this point, there's less government support of the local players. The local players have more funding. They move faster, and they're generally more capable than the multinationals operating in China. The multinationals are generally getting their butts kicked right now, and the government, for the most part, is not actually that involved. Now, 70+% of venture capital in China is coming from governments, but it's not coming from central. It's coming from local development funds, very decentralized, very spread out. And so, one of the myths is that there's some sort of monolithic government. It's almost like more like city-state in the U.S., where everybody's kind of independent and not really. It's even more independent because in the U.S. you have parties, and in China it's every district and every city for themselves, every province for themselves almost. So I would say where it would be like sort of nice if there were rules and open playing field. In China you're seeing that, but but the competition is intense. And while China in some areas like semiconductors is behind, in other areas like consumer and implementation of AI, they're far ahead. Because it's not, AI is not just about models; it's about data. And no matter how good your model is, if you don't have the data, it doesn't work. So the actual use of AI is much more prevalent in China than, say, the U.S. And so there's, if you want to call it contest, sure. There's definitely decoupling that's happened. And I don't think there's much we can do about that at this point. It's a reality. But in terms of China as the number one consumer market in the world, multinationals do not have a choice. They need to be there. How can they be competitive? And that's, I think, a big question. and we can get into that if you want to. But it is very, very difficult, and we're working with over 200 multinationals and helping them try and actually survive in China in this very competitive market.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Joy.
Yeah. Like I think very interesting observation, and actually we in China, like we have to, have a China team. We have a China CEO, we have a China CTO. We operate very locally, and in fact, that we actually have a legal structure where we have a completely independent Chinese company against, our U.S. company. Even though they're all under the same umbrella, but we keep them operationally, legally, completely separate. And you're exactly right. There's a lot of government funding, and even at the moment we're working with multiple government funding companies, application companies. There's lots of them. They help startups to apply for government funding, and it appears that we're qualified. And then I also agree that the data is very important. That's how you store your data. It's interestingly, when I was in China, US, people normally don't ask me how you store your data, because in China, you obviously you have to store data on the Chinese cloud. Otherwise, you can't get across the China firewall. The latency is really high. And the US people never ask that also. But the ones that typically ask me is like our clients from Japan and Korea. They tend to be like the more conservative, the more worried with the U.S. trade war. I definitely think there's still successful examples in multinational companies entering China. But normally, I actually have a few startup friends of mine. They're English speaking, and they ask me if I can help them get into China, and my answer is normally no, because I don't have the energy to help them. And also, I really felt like if the founder doesn't speak, or maybe a C-level person doesn't speak fluent Mandarin, it will have so much difficulties entering a foreign country. Yeah, and I'm a natural, I'm a fluent Mandarin speaker. I actually spent half my life in China, and then I came to the States for college at MIT. So for me, like when I'm in China, I just act like a native person that doesn't appear to be foreignized. Like most people just assume that I live in China, but really I'm actually traveling back and forth. Mm-hmm. So I think there's still a lot of success cases, and if we look at other success cases like LVMH, like these luxury brands in China, they're actually still thriving. I would say they're doing better in China than in any other country. Most of the growth is actually still generated from China. I think that says a lot about, the Chinese consumer. Actually, the income inequality is dividing. Almost 90% of the transaction, purchases are done by, the top, pretty much top 1% of the Chinese consumers. So I think there's still, and these Chinese consumers, for some reason, they still are very thirsty for foreign products. That said, even though we're in China, that actually most of the product we sell are, from our local clients like Alibaba, JD, Pinduoduo, and we also have, foreign brands like, Farfetch and LVMH. But we do see that, there's still the high-end consumer are still very attached to high-end products globally. So I think there's definitely room. And you see LVMH, that a joint venture with Alibaba before. So I think a lot of the global multinational companies also, first of all, trying to solve the legal entity problem, right? It's like, how can I have like a Chinese legal entity so I don't get, my butt kicked?
And that's a very good point. Actually, let me add to what Joy was saying. It's applied the other way as well. We deal with a lot